Today, we're going to be going down the rabbit hole quite a bit. And that is, we're going to enter into a discussion or just a monologue concerning Artemis of Perge. Now, most of you have never heard of Artemis of Perge. And if I brought it up and heard me mention it, and you probably thought to yourself, okay, so you're going to Google, and when you Google, you'll realize that there's not that many entries that come up. And one that does come up is the last time I did a talk on this Perge. So it's not a very popular topic, and the reason is that it's kind of cutting edge. It's materials that most people do not know about, and it is, in a sense, a way to how do I put this? Get into a conversation that we ordinarily wouldn't be in otherwise. So that means that you're going to have to write down and keep track of a lot of names of people and places, just a little bit, to be able to be able to comprehend this topic. Let me give a quick overview here, and then we'll go there. First of all, the goddess Artemis, obviously, is connected very much to an Anatolian context. And the city of Perge is located in the southern part of Anatolia, or Asia Minor, which is Turkey today. She was known as the Queen of Perge in a place known as Pamphylia. Her cult, however, her worship goes pretty far back, all the way back to the time of the ancient Luvians. And you're looking at me like, Luvians? Who are they? Well, I'll kind of break this down just a little bit. You have those known as the Hittites, who are Indo-Europeans. They kind of moved down south into Anatolia around 3000 BCE, bringing a special culture with them. And the Hittites, with them, there's another group that's related to them in language and culture, and they're known as the Luvians. It's spelled Luwians. And what happens is, while the Hittites dominate the Anatolian plateau, the Luvians dominate the western and southern coast of Anatolia. This culture is pretty exciting. Most people have never heard about it before. Archaeologists are now excavating the cities that are connected to the Luvians. By looking at the satellite images from above, we have determined that there is about 300 Luvian sites that still need to be excavated. And they're quite large indeed. And they contain, yes, many of them contain inscriptions and manuscripts. Whoa, yeah. So it is a huge moment when it comes to ancient history. Now you kind of know where I'm going with this. So you're kind of getting the beginning of this Rosetta Stone, so to speak, of information. These Luvians. One thing I'm going to say that will really catch your interest: the Luvians are the Trojans. Those of ancient Troy are Luvians. We know that beyond a reasonable doubt. So when we hear about the conflict between the Greeks and the Trojans, it's a conflict between the Mycenaeans and the Luvians. Another interesting bit that most people do not know is that the southern Luvians get pretty upset, and many of them become what we know as the Sea People. Yeah, the Sea People. You know, the ones that were part of ending the Bronze Age, the Great Bronze Age collapse. We know that by name. Who tells us? Well, of course, the Egyptians tell us, but other records too. I think I've got your interest a little bit, right? So the Luvians are connected to this particular goddess that we're going to be talking about today, and that's Artemis of Perge. So not just the Luvians now, Another group that's associated with them, of course, will be, of course, an offshoot connected to the Luvians, and those are the Lycians or the Lycians. So they are also they're from the southern part of Anatolia. They are Luvians. If you know your Egyptian records pretty well, they are also known as the Lukka, Lukka, and you find that the Lukka were used as mercenaries in the various battles between the Egyptians and the Hittites. Cool stuff, right? Another group that's connected to Artemis of Perge, hold your breath, the Minoans, the Minoan civilization. And now we know, and actually have the DNA materials here. I'll read a little bit of it if you want. There's a connection between the Minoans and the southern section of Anatolia. There is a bloodline, and so where Perge is, so the Minoans were there. So you got that mixture, and beyond all that, of course, you infuse a little bit of the Mycenaeans, and then later on, put an overlay of the Greeks on top of it, and ta-da! You got the background of Artemis of Perge. And it turns out that Artemis is connected to many indigenous beliefs in Anatolia. And we're going to even go over the name today. So it should be interesting. So we're traveling back to the Bronze Age, and then we're going to move in to the Iron Age. But let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so during the late Bronze Age, while the Hittites, as I said, occupied most of the central part of Anatolia, the Luvians, now that you know who they are, related to them, dominated much of the western and southern sections of Anatolia, which is Turkey today, inclusive of the region of Pamphylia. It's called Pamphylia. This is where Perge, Perge, is located. Now, what does the word Pamphylia mean? Obviously, the name Pamphylia is not from this era. It comes from later on. I have actually been to Pamphylia quite a few times. I've explored the region, and I've done research there, and you're getting some of it today, too. And yes, I plan to publish some of these materials, but I don't mind giving out the information that I'm giving today. But the word Pamphylia itself it comes from Greek, meaning many tribes, many tribes. It also could be argued that it means all tribes, or maybe all languages. So what do we get from this? It means that that when the Greeks came to this coastline, the region was occupied by a diversity of people who spoke different languages. So let's go into the geography of Pamphylia. Pamphylia, by the way, if you ever have a chance, when you go to Turkey, I highly recommend going to Pamphylia. It is one of the most beautiful sections of Turkey. I mean, here you have this beautiful coastline, and the water is almost turquoise in color. And you have a vast amount of vegetation and forests that go all the way to this, the shoreline. And it's surrounded by mountains. And these mountains are also covered with forest. Unbeknownst to many, Turkey is actually can be very green and very lush. It's kind of like California. In fact, it's exactly like California. So hey, maybe you've been there already, right? So we take a look at Pamphylia. It's bordered on three sides by mountains. You got the Lycian or Lycian mountains to the west, the Taurus mountains, the famous Taurus mountains to the north, and the hills of rough Cilicia to the east. And to the south, you have the Mediterranean, which basically dips into the plain and is known as the Bay of Anatolia. While the coastline moves generally straight east to west, Soon after reaching Anatolia, the shore turned sharply north to the south, north to south. This is, of course, generally regarded the end of Pamphylia, the beginning of Lycia. With that said, there's a city called Phasaelis, further down that north-south sharp coastline that sometimes is understood as Pamphylian and sometimes it's understood as Lycian. As for the eastern border, that would be Alania in the east. Now, there are many rivers. I know you're going, do we have to know the rivers? You got to know one of them at least. Okay, so here we go. There's many rivers that flow from the mountains down into the Pamphylian plains. Okay? And so here are a few, okay, including, this is the important one, including what's called the Kestrus River, in ancient times known as the Aksutai. This goes directly by Perge, and that's why we have to remember it. So it is directly by Perge. You also have the Eurymedion going down by Aspendos, and the Melis going down to the city of Side. It is notable that many of the major cities of Pamphylia are located inland from the sea, especially Perge, Silion, and Aspendos. Now, the mountains surrounding Pamphylia somewhat isolates the region. But there are ways to go via various passes. And for our topic, the Kestrus River is an important passageway. And again, it flows right next to Perge. Now, here we go. So let's skip in a little bit. As for the population of Pamphylia, the region primarily was occupied by those mysterious Luvians at first, with one group of the Luvians, known as the Lukka, L-U-K-K-A, that dominated the region up to the Kestrus River. So everywhere that was west of the river was occupied then by these Luvians known as the Lukka. Later, or you could see L-U-K-K-A will be understood as L-Y-C-I-A, and those are the Lycians. Got it? See, there's a connection between those words. But to the east of the Kestrus River, you have a mix of other Luvian groups, and to some degree, the Hittites too. So in a sense, Perge is on the borderland, got it, guarding the river between the Lukka on one side and the other groups like the Hittites, obviously, and a mix of other alluvians on the other side. Now, what happens is that you're thinking, okay, I got this down, Dr. Rita. You got it there. Well, beyond the Luvians and Hittites, we have, in the archaeology, we have around 1500 BCE. We have evidence also that the Minoans also came here. So, interacted. And then, of course, later on, the Mycenaeans also visited. So the Minoan association with Anatolia has been confirmed. And I'm going to give you some goobly-goop information if you're interested. We know that the Y chromosome results from the Cretan population, and it reveals a direct correlation with the people of Anatolia, and in general, the dating of the haplogroup known as J2A1HM319 in Crete is connected with the indigenous peoples going back to 3100 BCE. How's that for science? So, yes, they're related. That's right. The Minoans are related. You're thinking, but the Minoans are Greek. Don't tell a Minoan that, because they're not Greek. Mycenaeans are Greek. The Minoans are not. That making sense? Now, later Minoans intermarried with the Greeks. That's why there's a confusion there. But I hope that helps. We have, of course, taking a look here, we realize that The earliest Neolithic sites of Europe are located in Crete and mainland Greece. A debate does persist concerning whether these farmers originated in the neighborhood of Anatolia, but we won't go into that. I actually have more DNA evidence, actually the whole page worth, but I think we're done with that. So we do have evidence for this connection. Now let's go into, we move from the science, let's move into the mythology, or I should say maybe the history, although when we're talking about Herodotus, I'm not sure what to think at times. Herodotus, as well as other Greek writers, established that King Minos had great influence over Western Anatolia. Of course, the word Minos, that connects to the word Minoan later on. For example, Herodotus establishes that the Liligates were once subject to Minos of Crete and lived on the Aegean Islands until driven out by the Dorians and the Ionian Greeks, of course. So you have this, again, this legendary association going on there. Furthermore, we have the Lycians were also thought to have originated from Crete, according to the mythology there. Of course, Lycians are connected with Lucca, so you can see how there's this relationship that kind of goes back and forth between Crete, as well as Cyprus, and the mainland. I'm going to read you Herodotus. Herodotus states that the Lycians were from Crete in ancient times. He says, for in the past, none that lived on Crete were Greek. Now there was a dispute in Crete about the royal power between a certain Sarpedon and Minos, son of Europa. Minos prevailed in this dispute and drove out Sarpedon, and Sarpedon will be important to Pantheon culture, so that's why we're talking about them. So Sarpedon moved out along with his partisans, who, after being driven out, came to the Malayan land of Asia. What is now possessed by the Lycians was in the past Malayan, and the Malayans were also called the Solymi. For a while, Sarpedon ruled them, and the people were called the Termile, which was the name that they had brought with them, and that is still given to the Lycians by their neighbors. Okay, so we have this interesting connection, right? For a while, Sarpedon ruled them, all right, as I mentioned before, but then after, of course, by the way, we do have inscriptional evidence that connects what is being said by Herodotus right down to the material culture in Lycia, so there is a connection. Their customs, accordingly, he says, are partly Cretan and partly Carian. And you go, Carian, what's a Carian? Okay, so not to be too complicated, but you got the Pamphylians, and then you got next to them the Lycians, and next to them you have the Carians. So, I'm bringing this up. Here we go. But he says they have one thing which is their own. Here it is. Which is, here it is. But they have one thing which is their own and shared by no other men. They take their names not from their fathers, but from their mothers. And when one is asked by his neighbor who he is, he will say that he is the son of such a mother, and rehearse the mother of his mother, and so forth. Indeed, if a female citizen marries a slave, her children are considered pure-blooded. But if a male citizen, even the most prominent of them, takes an alien wife or concubine, the children are dishonored. Well, what are you saying here? Well, you're going to see here, and you can see it pretty easily, that you have the remnants of an egalitarian society. Are you seeing that, right? And you're going to see more of that as we go along. Don't worry, I'm going to give you more evidence. We're building the case. And you're going to see, as time goes on, that women in Pamphylia and Lycia had more rights and privileges and were viewed with esteem than other places throughout the ancient world. In fact, I don't want to give too much away ahead of time, but you're going to see that within the cult of Artemis of Perge, women were not only equal, they were in many ways above that of men. All right, this is going to be a fun ride. So, all right, building the case, you keep on going here. So, what will happen here is archaeologists, of course, have discovered that the Minoans did settle all along the coast of Asia Minor, and that gets kind of confusing because you're going, wait a minute. I thought you said the other groups were occupying there, the Luvians, for example. Well, what's going to happen is while the Luvians will dominate the western coast of Asia Minor and the southern coast of Asia Minor, what will happen is the Minoans will establish trading posts along that same coast, along the west as well as the south coast, and they'll interact with one another. And then later on, when the Minoans fall, then the Mycenaeans, who are Greeks, will take over those areas where those Minoan colonies are, and then they will have this relationship with the Luvians. Got it? So that's kind of how it works. Now, let's get to the. By the way, it's called the Suwa League, but we'll talk about that later. So during the 13th century BCE, we find the first mention of the city of Perge. Let's located in Pamphylia, 13th century BCE. That's 1200s. We find this in a treaty between the Hittite king Tudahaliya the fourth and Karunta, who is the king of Karhuntasa, and was his vassal. According to the treaty, the western border of Karunta's territory was the city of Parha and the Castreas River, as we of course know as the Castris River. And so here now, according to the treaty, west of Perge were designated the lands, they're actually called the Luca lands. There you have it. So at this time of the treaty, Perge, however, was about to fall into the hands of the Hittites. Now, the exact location of the city of Parhuntasa is unknown, with suggestions ranging from Konya, Kayseri, and Cappadocia. Anyway, because Perge was directly west of the Kestros, the city was not included as part of the kingdom of Tarhuntasa, but considered part of the Luca lands. And we see here, of course. Now, we won't go into the minutiae. We know a lot about Karunta, by the way. But as for Karunta, we would just say King Moatali sent Karunta to be raised by his younger brother, Hattusilus III, during which time his son, Tudalahia, became very close. And King Muateli decided to move his capital to Tarantusa. In exchange, he made his younger brother, Hattusilus III, the governor of Hattusa. We're dealing with Hittite politics. And I don't expect you to go through all of these names. Okay, but there you have it. Well, it turns out, and I do have to bring this up, is that we realize that there is a conflict in the Hittite records with another group. And that was not just the Luca, but it's another group known as the Ahiyawa. The Ahiyawa, Ahhiyyawa. That's, of course, also known as the Ahians. And so these are the Mycenaeans. And so what happens is, according to Hittite records, the Luca are making an alliance with the Greek Mycenaeans against the Hittites. And so, and of course, right in the middle of this is Perge, right? And I won't talk too much about this, but I'll just go here a little bit. And here we go. This is a quick summation because, again, this is material that most people don't know. You're talking about the sea people, confused. Where does this come in? What happens is during the late 1200s, late 1200s, What happens is this, is that the Luvians, including the Luca, have a trade, a metal ore trade with Cyprus. And so they become very rich with this trade from Cyprus. There's stories about this, right? And the Hittites, they become a little bit greedy. What I mean by greedy is that they don't want their their fellow Luvians, who are considered kind of less than themselves, to have a monopoly on this trade. So what they do is they cut through the territory of the Luvians in the south into the area of Pamphylia and cross over to Cyprus, and they secure that trade. They secure that trade. Well, what happens, the Luvians, including the Luca, they don't like this too much. They're not very happy about this. They don't like the Hittites for doing this. Now, at the same time, the Luvians were used as mercenaries by the Hittites against the Egyptians, and the Egyptians were using the Luvians as mercenaries against the Hittites. And they're fighting back and forth. So basically, you have the Egyptians on their chariots. While the mercenaries do all the battle, they're fighting amongst themselves between Hittite forces and Egyptian forces. And it looked like if the Egyptians were losing that particular battle, all they would do is turn their chariots away and go off. Meanwhile, the mercenaries, these Luvians, would be cut down. Not very nice stuff, right? They're kind of fodder. And this goes back even to the vice versa. Well, you have something called the Peace of Kadesh, during which time there's now peace between Egypt and the Hittites. And that means all of these mercenaries are now unemployed. So, who are Luvians? Many of them are Luvians. So they're going to want to turn against their previous employer. Are you seeing this? And then on top of it, right, the Hittites go ahead and they take Cyprus. So you can imagine, right, the Luvians are angry. And the Luvians make an alliance with the Mycenaeans. This is the time of the Trojan War. You guys following me, right? And so what's going to happen is you see people go, these Luvians, along with other groups who felt disenfranchised, are going to go crazy and go to battle. And as a result, the Hittites are going to fall. And much of the kingdoms of the Middle East will also fall. And the Egyptians will be so weakened, it will be pretty much the beginning of the end of the new kingdom for the Egyptians. I mean, this is a fall of the Bronze Age. Oh, how are the Luvians doing? They survive, they hang on, and they create a very unique culture that continues, right? And it brings in threads of other cultures as well. Okay, so what happens now is that we have another story, and that is that we have the Mycenaeans, who are Greeks. By the way, I just want to mention, well, I mentioned during the Trojan War, you do know that Artemis and Apollo are on the side of the Luvians, right? You do know that. Oh, by the way, we do know the history of the Trojans, who are Luvians. We know that history. I'll say this just for fun. You have the Luca. That's one particular group of Luvians. Another group, they're known as the Walusas. The Walusas. Walusa. Now, what happens is you have this W sound, wa, in this particular, in the Luvian dialect, that of course translates over into the Greek, Walusa, with a wa. What happens is the W drops out, wa, and it becomes Ilusa, as in, and so this region is connected to, the city is called Ilusa in the area of Troas. And of course, Ilusa will eventually become the idea of the Iliad. Iliad comes from, so Walusa, Ilusa, Iliad. And the region, the Troas region, becomes Troy. So it's kind of funny is that the region is Troy in a sense, and the main city is Elusa. It's kind of like with California, it would be like confusing the capital, calling the capital California and calling the state Sacramento. So they got things kind of confused as time goes on. Just a little bit of heads up there. But we do know the whole history here. Now, what will happen is you're going to have the fall, and the Mycenaeans start to spread throughout this region, and including, of course, a certain Mopsus is brought in, who's the grandson of Tiresias, and he is also arrives in Pamphylia and is considered, in a sense, a second founder, but this is the Greek founder. So now we have the next overlay. So during the 12 into the 1100s, you have now the Greeks mixing with the Pamphylians. You guys got it? It's kind of like a nice big stew, right? Now, moving right along, what about Artemis? You brought up Artemis. Is there? So what happens is that you do have these various indigenous places that and of course they have place names that are similar, but we do find that there is the word Artemis, and the Artemis. What happens is that word amalgamates with the mother goddess of Anatolia, especially in areas of Pamphylia and Lycia. So we do find the name Artemis in Linear B tablets. These are the Mycenaeans. These are the Greek Mycenaeans. It is mentioned there, but its context comes earlier and not from a Greek context. In fact, the context goes back to a Minoan and Luvian context. Okay, we'll go into that a little bit. Let's stick with the Mycenaeans. And for the Mycenaeans, so we look at Linear B tablets, and we find Atimito, and Atimete, right? And of course, Homer in the Iliad refers this name as connected to the mistress of animals. Now, if you guys are familiar with the Minoan civilization, the mistress of animals is connected to those of Crete and the Minoan civilization. And of course, in fact, she's also known as the master mistress of animals. And we find this also in Anatolian and Minoan art. But we take a look at the etymology of the name Artemis. And some people say, well, it's Greek. It derives from the word arctos, meaning bear, and it's connected to the bear cult in Attica. But this is a rather forced meaning, and it doesn't seem to connect with the ancient sources. Also, this bear cult was to localize the phenomena and reveals more of a recent attempt to claim this goddess as Greek. The name Artemis, in connection with the name Britomartis, the goddess of mountains and hunting, who is primarily worshipped on Crete, and who is often viewed as a mountain nymph, may have had some relations, as she is also synchronized with Artemis, according to ancient sources. So there is an acknowledgement of a connection with the Cretan context, the Minoan context, but not the Attic context. But it looks like that it appears that even the Minoan word is an offshoot of an earlier word. Here we go. This is good stuff, and this is new stuff. So here we go. Now, the Lydians, who are connected, Lydians are also connected, they're also Luvians. It's another group, Luvians, Lydians, of Western Anatolia, called Artemis by the name of Artemus. And there also seems to be another connection. According to Lycian inscriptions, we see Artemis is referred to as Arteme. And of course, the question is, I'll ask, which is the older root? Or they derive from an older source? Well, here we go. So we take a look, and it looks that the word Ertemile, which we see in the Lycian language, is one of the earliest forms of the word Artemis. Now we have Stephen Colvin and other scholars looking at this, but it appears that the root of the word Artemis is southern Anatolia. It comes from those who are known as Luca, the Lycians, and so you see, and of course they are Luvians. Got the context? So we take a look. We do have the earliest name. So once again, Artemis becomes Ertemi, Ertemi, which in turn becomes Ertemile, and you can hear the ancient feel to it. You even have the double T's that appear, which goes all the way back. Melkart and others talk about this. So, in essence, while we do not know the exact meaning of the name Artemis, we do know it's not Greek in origin. And this goes along with the goddess herself. Now, here we go. You go, oh, wait. So, as noted by Grainger as well as others, the name Perge, or back to the city of Perge, where the Artemis of our study is centered, of course, is also, he says, not in itself Greek, and it would have seemed to be Perea in the local dialect of the time the coins were minted, unquote. And again, the word Parha, which becomes Perge, is also an ancient Lycian or Lucan name. In fact, what we know from the evidence concerning ancient Pamphylia and Perge in particular is that it is primarily Luvian, but was contested by both the Hittites to the north and the Mycenaeans to the west, and that those Luvians who frequently centered this region happened to be known as the Luca, who would later be associated with the Lycians. Okay, there you have it. Okay, so, well, now, who were the Lycians? See how we're kind of working our way down? Okay, so who were the Lycians? Okay, we know that they called themselves, according not only to written sources, but inscriptions, they called themselves the Termali. And a place, in fact, we see this at a place called Xanthos. There stands a trilingual stele with a designation that says Termali, and also it is connected to the word Luca. Okay, we know that the Lycian language was a form of Luvian. We know that the Lycians or the Luca were part of what's called the Asua League, which are other Luvians. We know that they were connected to the Walusians, as we talked about before. We know that while the Hittites fell, the Luvians continued to be strong and steady. We do know also that there is a reference to those associated with the Luvians, even in the Iliad, talking about that there too. Sarpedon and Glaucus and the Lycians are also mentioned as fighting on the side of the Trojans. So even according to the Iliad, you have, again, Lycians were fighting side by side with what we now know as the Trojans in the end. Okay. Now what happens here is that, now what about the territory of the Lycians? We kind of talked about it, but the main central area is the Xanthos Valley. This is a place full of orchards and fields. And we know that during the 14th century BCE, the king Mudawata was chased by the king Ataressa of the Mycenaeans in this area. And it was, and so we do know that there's some history, but there's a reference to a sanctuary. There's what's the sanctuary known as the Mashualwa, Mashuilwa. And this particular place, Mashualwa, I am saying it right. It sounds like a bunch of mush, doesn't it? Mashualwa. Say that 3 times fast. It is identified with the holy site of Xanthos, spelled Xanthos, Thus. No wonder people don't want to go into this field. You have such fun words, right, to talk about, right? And of course, the Sianta River goes through Xanthos, right? And it's considered all the way back when, considered all the way back in the late 14th century as a holy place. And it becomes Xanthos, and it will continue to be considered holy all the way into the Greek and into the Roman period of time. So this is a holy site, a very important place. Now, what happens is, what were the so Mashuala, the sanctuary, will be connected with Xanthos, but specifically a very nearby shrine known as the Latun. Got it? So while Xanthos is located nearby, next to it is called Latun. The Latun really is the site of the sanctuary of Mashuala. And you're going, so is this important? Yeah, Latun will be sacred to the goddess Leto. It will be sacred to her offspring, Artemis and Apollo. Got it? So we have established that going all the way back to the 14th century BCE, that you have a holy site that will be connected directly in a later form to Leto, Artemis, and Apollo. Okay, that's important. Okay, so what were the religious beliefs of the Luca? Right, as far as we know from the Iliad, we do know that the Luca worshipped a god by the name of Apollo. Hey, look, there's a connection already, right? Apollonius, right? So in fact, what happened when Glatos is killed, Apollo is the one to take his body back to Lycia to receive a proper burial. So Apollo, you're going, wait a minute, Alcarico, I thought we're just talking about Artemis. You mean Apollo has roots also in Lycia? Wow, this is like a double day, right? Okay. So yes. So we find this out. By the way, one thing one thing that's important about the Troy also is that we have Luvian literature that talks about the fact that Troy was actually viewed as the homeland of the Luvians, and the Luvians spread from there along the western coast and down into the southern coast. So there's more connections, but one of the things about the Luca. So Luca, of course, are the Lycians, and they're connected to obviously the Luvians. At first, their chief god was the storm god by the name of Tarhu. The word Tar means to defeat or conquest. And so Tarhun is often shown holding an axe. Often it's a double-headed axe or even a mace, right? And sometimes, on the other hand, he's holding the triple thunderbolt. And the sacred animal is always the bull. Okay. Another one is Peloponnese. He's the exalted son. He's the god of agriculture. In the sense he embodies the crops. You have Kamrusepa. This is the Luvian Hittite goddess, of healing, of medicine, and magic. She is the mother of Aruna, and she is part of the Peloponnese myth concerning the missing vegetation god, because he goes missing. Peloponnese goes missing. According to the story, she enlisted the help of a human to perform a ritual to remove the anger from this angry god, Peloponnese. And by the way, if you're interested in relieving your anger, here's a recipe here. So she used the following ingredients for her ritual. So here's the ingredients to get rid of anger: cedar essence, sap, chaff, grain, sesame, figs, olives, grapes, ointment, malt, honey, cream, and oil. Upon the completion of this ritual, she sacrificed 12 rams of the sun gods. And then, of course, Peloponnese' anger turned in towards the underworld. I'm not sure if I would want to go through the 12 rams, but there you have it. Pihasas was another Luvian god of weather and lightning. But there's a goddess that's connected to the Luvians, and it is a form that will become later understood as Demeter, and is known as Ra, often called the Madonna of the Luvians. The Ra is found even within a Minoan context, because I just want to mention this when it comes to Minoan. So far, we have 1,400 Minoan inscribed clay tablets that reveal about 78 hieroglyphic signs that form about 125 words. The good news is about 15 of these Minoan hieroglyphic signs and 45 of these words we can read because we have the Luvian counterparts. So the Luvian is helping us understand a little bit. And we see these commonalities. Of course, Dimata, which is Demeter, is amongst them. So we have this goddess, this great goddess of the Luvians, of the Lycians. And also, we take a look and we also realize that the Luvians are connected to those known as the Gali priests, which is connected to the cult of Kibali. So, in fact, the center of these ecstatic priests happen to be in the area of the southern Luvians. These Luvian priests practice cutting and bloodletting rituals, especially during the festival known as the Istanua. They use what's called a tympanium. Now, it's interesting that the tympanium, which is, of course, the frame drum, spreads from the Middle East along the southern shore of Anatolia, and then gets to Greece, and then later on it backtracks into Phrygia, where it is then connected to the Kibali cult. But it's interesting that the tympanium is part of rituals of the Luvians, and of course the Lycians who we're talking about. In fact, there was an act of drinking from the tympanium, which was a custom at that time. Hittite texts tell how the Luvian men of a certain place called Lulupaya drink from what was described as a durable, so they're drinking literally from a tympanium. Another Anatolian belief that became a Lycian tradition was a belief in the strength of rocks around them to represent the strength of the gods. And so what they would do in places in Lycia, like a Patara, they would create rock altars, and these niches cut into the living rock are believed to be connected to the gods. Now, what will happen here, as I said before, is there's a connection between Eni Mahana with the sanctuary of Musawawa. And we take a look, and it turns out that the word Eni Mahana is actually connected to Luvian and translates as Mother of the Gods. So basically, at the shrine of Mashuala, Mashuiluwa, you have a deity known as Eni, E-N-I, Mahana, Mahanahi, who also is known as Anis Masanasis, and in Luvian that means Mother of the Gods. I told you I'm giving you all the specifics. So you have the Mother of the Gods being worshipped that will later on become understood as Leto and then connected to Artemis. And then that name will spread east and west. And of course, we talked about the derivation of the word Artemis already. Now, Eni Mahana was, we do have an image discovered at Latun, again, further connecting modern, well, actually, Latun that was thrived during the Greek and Roman times with this ancient goddess. Later on, during the Greek and Roman times, at the Latun, there were 3 temples that stand there, dedicated to Leto and her 2 children. Okay. Now, Leto was loved by Zeus, but was persecuted, according to the stories, by Hera, and she fled the goddess's wrath. And according to the story, she fled to Patara, in Lycia, where she gave birth to twins. In one story, she's harassed by shepherds at the spring when she tries to have some water. According to Antonius Liberalis in his Metamorphoses, Leto, after giving birth to Apollo and Artemis on the island of Asteria, went to Lycia, taking her children with her to the baths of Xanthos. As soon as she arrived in that land, she came first upon the spring of Melite and wanted very much to bathe her children there before going on to Xanthos. But some herdsmen drove her away so that their own cattle could drink at the spring. Leto made off and left for Melite. Wolves came out to meet her and, wagging their tails, led the way, guiding her to the river Xanthos. She drank the water and bathed the babes and consecrated Xanthos to Apollo, while the land which had been called Tremellis she renamed Lycia, or Wolf Land, from the wolves that had guided her. Then she returned to the spring to inflict a penalty on the herdsmen who had driven her away. They were then still washing their cattle beside the spring. Leto changed them all into frogs, whose backs and shoulders she scratched with a rough stone. Throwing them all into the spring, she made them live in the water. To this day, they croak away by rivers and ponds. You know, you don't want to mess with a goddess, especially a goddess like Leto. She basically turned them all into frogs. That's what they get for denying her and her kids some water. There's another story which I don't have time to talk about, but Ovid in his Metamorphoses also talks about it. But I do want to bring up the introduction. He says, in Lycia's fertile fields, once, long ago, the peasants scorned Leto, not unscathed. It's not a thing well known. The men, of course, being low-born louts, but marvelous all the same. I saw with my own eyes, Ovid says, the lake and place famed for the miracle. So Ovid's telling a story that he went to Lycia, and he says, for my old father too, old by then, too worn to take the road, had charged me to retrieve some special steers and given me a Lycian for a guide. With him, I traversed those far pasture lands when standing in the middle of a mare and black with ashes sacrifice, behold, an ancient altar ringed with waving reeds. So he basically came upon an ancient altar surrounded by reeds. My guide stood still and muttered anxiously, be gracious to me. And I muttered too, be gracious. Then I asked him if the altar was built to Pan or the Naiads or some local god. And he gave this reply, no, my lad, no mountain god enjoys this altar. It is claimed by her, Leto, whom once the queen of heaven, barred from the world, whom drifting Delos scarcely dare consent to harbor, and then basically tells the same story that we heard earlier about turning these people into frogs. so you do have, again, these ancient connections to Leto. Okay, so there you have it. Now, the Leto's name is maybe related to the word Lada. So Leto and Lada, which in Lycian means woman or wife. Now that gets interesting. So wait, Leto is understood not just as woman, but as wife. Are you guys following me? And so the earlier legends could be that it is not Hera who is the wife of Zeus. That's right. It is Leto who is the wife of Zeus. I know this is like, well, your brain just kind of going, okay, well. And then, of course, if we go back earlier, we have evidence that it is Poseidon and Leto who are together. Because there's another story altogether. But there you go. Again, I know the mind is just going, wow. Now, of course, Apollo, as I said, is also an Anatolian god that's adopted by the Greeks in both myth and ritual. He is summoned to return to Greece. In the Iliad, Homer mentions Apollo as Phobos, which means illuminated, as well as the quote, the famous Lycian archer Apollo. So wait, so Apollo, along with his Anatolian sister Artemis, were the ones on the side of the Trojans. Once again, so now I'm just bringing in another. So Apollo and Artemis are Luvian gods. Got it? Now, what happens is that Artemis is considered to be the continuation of the mother goddess religion under a new name. Got it? So, what will happen now? I want to mention one other thing just for fun. I want to mention that in Lycia, do you have a place called Telemosos? I've been there, which was famous for its soothsayers who were dedicated to Apollo and were said to be very important throughout the ancient world. So the center of prophecy in connection to Apollo was also the Lycian areas. Now, we also have, I won't spend too much time on this, but there's also Apollo's sister Artemis had a cult center at Myra, which is another Lycian city, and it is also connected specifically to Artemis Eleutheria, or Eleuthera, which, by the way, is the name of a Minoan goddess. Again, that's a whole other talk, but I will just make it very clear that you have another site. And here you have this name Artemis connected directly to a Minoan goddess directly. This temple dedicated at Myra. It was magnificent, but was destroyed partly in 141 CE, a little bit rebuilt. And then you know who actually destroyed this temple in the end? Santa Claus. I got your attention. What? Old Saint Nick? Yeah. So what happens is Saint Nicholas, the bishop of Myra, who later becomes associated with Santa Claus, was very zealous and basically he arrived at this temple, according to stories of Artemis, and destroyed it. So there you have it. Now, other things about the Lycians that we'll find interesting here that goes way back when is that it was a custom for men in ancient Lycia to have their hair long. I mean, we're talking long and sometimes shoulder length. So again, a connection to this ancient past. So we see this in various places. For example, Polyaenus, he notes that a man named Cheremides managed to escape across Lycia by putting on false hair. What does that mean? He's putting on false hair so he looks like another Lycian. That's how he gets away. There's also the Oceanomica, tells the story of Mausolus taxing for the hair length of the Lycians. So how Mausolus, as in the mausoleum, a Halicarnassus, right? The famous one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Actually made a tax on the Lycians since they, for their hair, because they want to keep their hair. Want to keep your hair, you got to pay for it. So there you have it. We also find long-haired Lycians in relief sculptures. For example, a sarcophagus from Limra and in a silver vase, also in the British Museum. So yeah, there you have it. And so interestingly enough, there are other sources that talk about the fact that they wore greaves and corselets, the men. They carry bows of cornel wood. They sometimes had goat skin slung around their shoulders and hats that were stuck with a bunch of feathers. And they carried daggers and rib hooks, according to Herodotus. So, an interesting folk, aren't they? So they're wearing long hair, right? And goat skins, slung around their shoulders, right? And hats with feathers. I make this up. So I would say that the Lycians, who are pretty interesting. So what will happen is, as I said before, the Lycians, who are the Luca, they're part of the culture of Pamphylia all the way up and inclusive of the city of Perge. Got it? Okay, so now we have that connection. So good, good. Now we can focus on Perge. So we realize that when we talk about Pamphylia, in the case of Perge, because it's on that river and it's on the western side of that river, the Kestris River, we know that it is still Luca land, which is Lycian land, which is connected to that culture that I just described. And we also know that since it is connected to Artemis, the Artemis that is worshipped there and venerated is connected to the Artemis that we just talked about, who is the great mother of gods, right? Uh, in Lycia, in places like Latun, Xanthos, and other places. You guys got it? So I've made the link, you know, and you always have to draw a chart or a diagram. So let's go a little bit further here. Let's look about Perge. So time for some water. We're going to get further down the rabbit hole, and we're going to go way further. So this is going to be, but it's going to be a lot of fun now. We got the whole basis here. So Perge is located on the fertile Pamphylian plain by the Kestris rivers. Most scholars agree that the earliest settlement of Perge was located upon the Acropolis. In fact, it was occupied as early as the Chalcolithic era. So, 4,500 to 3,500 BCE. What's really interesting is that there are natural springs. And I've been up there. I've been up the Acropolis. Natural springs located at the very top of the terrace. And the water still today pours down various places around the hill. Of course, there's porous limestone around, so sometimes it just kind of bleeds out of the rock. During this era, those living in ancient Perge worshiped the goddess, as I mentioned, and that connects to the goddess of the Lycians, but with a little bit of a different variation. So the goddess was named, in this case, but it still has the same attributes, Wanasa Pre, Wanasa Pre, which translates as Lady Perge. Now, what's interesting is the word lady, Wanasa. If you know, and I'm sure many of you do know, the ancient Mycenaeans, a name for a king, an ancient Mycenaean, which are Greeks, is known as a Wanax. So a Wanasa could be understood as a lady, but it could also be understood as a queen. So it could be Lady Perge, or the goddess is known as Queen Perge. Okay, so we can see here, even though it is a Luvian, Luca, Lycian goddess connected to the Western realm, we still can see Greek Mycenaean overlay. Now we take a look at the pottery, and we find cryptogeometrical pottery dates from the 9th or 8th century BCE. So there seems to be a kind of a gap. The problem is I won't go too much into the archaeology, but the problem is the top part of the Acropolis is really eroded away. We'll go into that. And so in some places we've lost some of the levels, and in other places the material culture has been messed with. But anyway, one of the earliest associations of someone specifically connected to Artemis of Perge by name, and her name was Damphile. Damphile, or Damophile, lived in the 7th into the 6th centuries BCE. Now, you do want to pay attention to this, right? So Damophile, or Phile, Damophyle, according to this, she was a female poet, and she composed hymns sung in honor of Artemis of Perge. And she did that in the Aeolian and the Pamphylian modes. Now, so she was a lyric poetress of Pamphylia. And you know who she was a companion of? She was actually the pupil and companion of Sappho. Yes, the famous Sappho. Who thrived around 611 BCE. And like Sappho, she instructed other ladies She also composed erotic poems and hymns. Now, the person who connects Sappho with Damophylae was Philostratus. And in fact, he uses an interesting verb that connects her. The word is homoleo. So the word homoleo can be referred to as to be a pupil of, but it also could mean somebody who has sexual intercourse. And so it is used in connection with Sappho. So she was sometimes, it's either maybe a pupil of her or a very close companion, or another context is that they were lovers. Wow. So once again, we have this connection with empowered women, right? Early on in Perge, we're going to see this later on too. This is just part of the culture of this area. And she thrives during this period. So the student or companion or lover of Sappho, she ends up in Perge. So I think that's, to me, is pretty interesting. Now, we take a look here on the flat summit of the western hill of the Acropolis. We find that there's a cult building that dates from the 6th century BCE. And then Perge returns to history as a Pamphylian Greek city. When the Persians arrived, then the Athenians, and then the Persians again. In fact, the name on the Athenian tribute list, Perge is included with an unknown tribute in 425 BCE. Perge then starts to gain its reputation as a place for the worship of Artemis. But in fact, Pseudo-Silix makes a reference to the sanctuary of Artemis of Perge around the year 360 BCE. He states as follows: if you proceed upward from the sea, there is then Phasalis, a city with a harbor, and this is a gulf, and Idiros, a city, the island Liternatia, and Olbia, Megalis, and Perge, a city with a sanctuary of Artemis. And of course, he goes on. So the city of Perge is, when he's going through this list of cities of Pamphylia, it's immediately associated with its temple. This is the same thing we're going to see with Artemis of the Ephesians and the city of Ephesus. So there you have it. So you do have the Hellenization of Pamphylia, but there's still a very strong native non-Hellenistic element in the local population that we can see, especially through the inscriptions with the local names, which are again Luvian or Lycian, right? So, and she was understood very much as Wanasa Pre, which I mentioned before, as lady or the queen of Perge. We see that she is honored in one inscription by a man named Kalmuts, son of Laramos, which again is a Luvian name. And so there you have it. So what happens is that slowly but surely, the Lady of Perge, or Queen Perge, will be identified with Artemis, and they will start to share some of the same, well, obviously will be shown or revealed as sharing the same attributes. We found also there's a stele devoted to Artemis Perge. It's in limestone, dates for the second half of the 4th century BCE. And it also testifies, and it's from mainland Greece. That's what's interesting. So now we have the spread of the worship of Artemis of Perge, and it's starting to spread all around the Mediterranean. So it's not just going to be at Perge. Here in mainland Greece, we're going to see it at a place called Ambremsia, on the northern western coast of Greece. Artemis Perge was worshipped there as well. So we have that. Another place in Egypt, at Naucratis, in the 4th century, we have another place where Artemis of Perge is worshipped. So the spread now of the worship is happening throughout the Mediterranean. So then Alexander the Great arrives, and he occupied Perge with part of his army. And then, of course, you have Seleucids to take over. And during this time, around 190, the lower city is fortified by the Seleucids. And now you have one of the founders mentioned as Mopsus, as well as Calchas of Perge, which we find in earlier myths. During this period of time, the lower city streets were organized in a consistent manner. The Greek poet Callimachus in the 3rd century BCE writes in his hymn 3 to Artemis, he actually mentions Artemis of Perge, declaring, "Which now of islands finds most favor with thee, Artemis? What city of cities of Perge in Pamphylia?" Unquote. During the 3rd century BC, the cult of Perge, Artemis Perge, continued to spread into the Mediterranean. In fact, we have an interesting text here that I'm going to bring up. That is, there is what's called the Union of Pergasti in Lindos on the island of Rhodes. There was an association connected to Artemis of Perge. Now, this is on a slab of marble, and it does mention a group devoted to Artemis of Perge at this time. And so I have the document, but I won't read it here. But and I actually have it in Greek as well. Other sites, including worshiping of Perge, includes Thera, Ambracia, and a few others as well, Arasanites. So there you have it. So what's going to happen now is in Perge, you have another famous individual. His name is Artemidorus, son of Apollonius. And of course, we have here, it's interesting here, is that he has an inscription. He leaves an inscription. So basically, this Artemidorus, he leaves Perge in Pamphylia on the southern coast of Asia Minor, and he goes to the island of Thera. And we find he leaves an inscription on Thera, and it goes as follows. It says, "To Artemis, Soteria of Perge." Now, already, okay, what I find is interesting here is the word Soteria means savior. So there could be perhaps a mystery cult connected already to Artemis of Perge by this period of time. During the time of the first half of the 2nd century BCE. But he says, "To Artemis Soteria of Perge, Artemidorus, son of Apollonius of Perge, Artemis prophesied for Artemidorus 90 years of life, and Chronea, which means forethought, added another 3 to it." So basically, we have this Artemidorus who's dedicating this altar to Artemidorus, thanking her for his long lifespan of 90, and that he heard in a prophecy before from her that he would live for 90 years. And so he's thanking her, saying, "Guess what? Thank you so much. I not only lived 90 years, but I lived 3 more years, 93 years. Thank you so much." There's obviously clearly a connection here between the two. Now, we do have coins starting to be minted of Artemis of Perge. And at first, it appears to have a very Hellenistic head at first. And this reflects a Greek and Hellenistic interpretation of the image. But this is going to change as time goes on. So at first, it's kind of superficial. It connects to the, to the Hellenistic influence. But you're going to see later on, it's going to change into an exotic datum. It's kind of strange image that I posted online a little bit. By the way, during this time, there's another famous individual from Perge. His name is Apollonius of Perge. He's a famous mathematician and astronomer who lived in the late 3rd and early 2nd centuries BCE. And he brought together the ideas of Euclid and Archimedes. and clarified them, especially when it comes to ellipses and parabolas and so forth. Anyway, in 190 BCE, the Romans, as I said, defeated the Seleucids. In 188 BCE, a Seleucid garrison still at Perge was expelled by Manlius, the Romans. And then he, of course, it says he led the troops toward Perge, which alone in this district was held by a royal garrison. As he approached, the commander of the garrison met him, asking for a truce of 30 days in order that he might consult King Antiochus about surrendering the city. Well, so around 188 BCE, Perge came under Roman rule, and in 129 BCE, it formally became part of the province of Asia. So we get to the 1st century BCE, and we have the famous geographer Strabo, and in his geography, he writes as follows. The Kestros River in Pamphylia, he mentions, and sailing 60 stadia up this river, one comes to Perge, a city, and near Perge, on a lofty site, to the temple of Artemis Pergea, where a general festival is celebrated every year. Now, it's interesting because we still have not found the great temple of Perge. I have an idea where it is. I'll give a hint at the end of the talk today, but we still do not know. But you can see here from this description, it says, and near Perge on a lofty site to the temple of Artemis Perge. So this site is near Perge and it's on a lofty site. But which lofty site? Now, according to Cicero, right in the 1st century BCE, the sanctuary of Artemis of Perge was famous for its riches, causing many to want to steal away from its treasures. One, his name is Verus, was unfortunately successful in stealing from this temple. Cicero declares, at Perge, we are aware that there is a very ancient and very holy temple of Diana. That too, I say, was stripped and plundered by you, and all the gold which there was on Diana herself was taken off and carried away. What in the name of mischief can such audacity and insanity mean? He says. By the way, it was also kind of an inside job because Cicero, apparently there was somebody who helped out. In fact, there was a doctor by the name of Artemidorus who acted in Verus's case to help out with this great theft. Now, what happens is when the Romans create the province known as Galatia in central Anatolia around 25 BCE, the Romans decided to connect it to the coast of the Mediterranean, and a new road known as the Via Sebaste was constructed, linking Pisidian Antioch in Galatia with Perge and Pamphylia. And so now it becomes Perge is a direct route. There's a direct road going to the sea. So it becomes even more important. As for coinage, the traditional Artemis form still appears during this period of time in the 2nd to the 1st centuries BCE. But things are going to start to change as time goes on. In fact, what happens is that during the 1st century BCE, we find that there's a bronze coin. And Artemis now is sitting within a triangular niche and is crowned with a round headdress and has a distinct head. But once you get to the body, it appears to be a beetle or a block-like in form, definitely not based upon any Greek form. So what's going to happen is that the indigenous goddess and her form is starting to leak into the local coinage. We see this also when it comes to the exotic Artemis of the Ephesians, the same kind of thing. The early coinage shows Artemis looking just like, Artemis, the goddess of the moon and hunt, its eggs and so forth, although you see the bee connection. But eventually it will become the polymastic, the multi-breasted, Artemis of the Ephesians. You're going to see the same kind of thing, that the Artemis at Perge is going to become increasingly more exotic, un-Greek, especially the lower part. In fact, it looks like that this image is on a plinth in many cases. You're going to see more coins. And eventually, you're going to see this Artemis Perge looking more exotic within a 2-columned shrine with an eagle and a pediment with wings spread above. And of course, we see on the reverse, we see the quiver of Artemis, but and we also see that the head of Artemis, by the way, it looks like a stone, and in many cases, it looks like a meteorite. In fact, many of the coins that we see, it's a very strange looking stone, very roughly hewn, which had led many scholars to believe that the stone, that the Artemis of Perge is connected to a stone that fell out of heaven. And then later on, this idea of this stone or image that fell out of heaven will be connected to Artemis of the Ephesians, and then will be mentioned, of course, in the Acts of the Apostles in the Bible, that connected to Artemis of the Ephesians, the image which fell from heaven. We also have, of course, a Hittite connection with the star that falls in Ephesus, which is Ephesus. So once again, you're going to have these connections of images falling to heaven. And of course, Artemis of Perge may very well have this connection, right? So in the Roman period, coins continued to show the Pergean Artemis in her temple in the form of a block of stone. In fact, more and more, she has less resemblance to a human figure. And in some cases, she just becomes a rock that has a lot of votive niches. So you have the exotic mysterion of Artemis of the Perge being emphasized, right? Now, again, we have to take a look here that as time goes on, I have to, of course, move along here a little bit. Here we go. So we take a look, and sorry, I'm skipping pages here. Oh yeah. One of the images, lower part of the cult image, we see that's extent, is divided into two completely flat stripes, underneath of which are remnants of a third one. In between are narrow stripes. In the uppermost zone, there's a 7 long sleeve, probably all female figures appear. In the bottom, there are 6 of them. We see here in this image a cathara player and other musical instruments. So it does appear that you have a depiction of the worshipers around Perge. Oh, of course, all of them having very long hair. So there you have it. We see an image. We also see that under the chin of the goddess, there's like an acorn chain, which seems to be reminiscent of Artemis of the Ephesians. Now, of course, Perge, I won't go too much into this, will be connected again to the book, the Acts of the Apostles in the Bible. I'll just say this briefly, that the book of Acts describes 3 journeys of the Apostle Paul made in Asia Minor. Before arriving in Perge on the first missionary journey, Paul and Barnabas visited the island of Cyprus, which is the home of Barnabas. John Mark, the cousin of Barnabas, accompanied them. After preaching at Salamis, they traveled to the provincial capital, Paphos, where they met the Roman governor Sergius Paulus, whose actual home was visiting Antioch. And maybe it was the suggestion that the apostles decided to go to visiting Antioch. But when they crossed the way from Cyprus, they arrived, according to the story, at Perge. However, one of the members of their party was not happy with the change of direction. And when they reached Perge, John Mark left Paul and Barnabas and returned to Jerusalem. So you have this story here. So Christianity does arrive during this period of time. The Perge is being built up. You have the famous Palaestra of Claudius being built later on. Roman baths are being built. The Emperor Titus also does quite a bit of constructions as well. But you have somebody that's very important, and her name is Plancia Magna, who came from a very distinguished family of Perge. She was, in fact, she was the daughter of the Roman senator, proconsul Marcus Plancius Verus, and the daughter of the Herodian princess, as in the Jewish princess, Julia. Her mother, who was a Jewish princess from the Herodian, as in King Herod's line, came to Perge and became a priestess of Artemis of Perge. So she apostatized from Judaism and became a worshiper of Artemis Perge, and she served the temple there. And so later on, of course, obviously her daughter then became a priestess of Artemis Perge, and then became the top priestess. And again, this is fascinating because she was incredibly wealthy, and in fact, due to her goodness and generosity, what happened is that she, in a sense, became a second founder of Perge. She was known for her civic-mindedness, being very charitable, and she dedicated herself to the beautification and the development of Perge. So very important lady. She worked, for example, on the Hellenistic Gate and the Horseshoe Courtyard there, and we find various inscriptions dedicated to her. But her prestige, a lot of it comes from her connection to Artemis of Perge. She had the title of High Priestess of the Temple and the goddess Artemis of Perge. One surviving inscription at the base from a statue erected by the community of Perge says as follows: Plantia Magna, daughter of Marcus Plantius Verus and daughter of the city, priestess of Artemis, and both first and sole public priestess of the Mother of Gods for the duration of her life, pious and patriotic. We see that, so very important lady. During the 2nd century CE, the Theater Perge received a refit. It was rebuilt. And we see in the theater, in the central section, a frieze showing Artemis Pergea holding a cornucopia in her left hand and her right hand a cult statue. On either side, there are figures of old priests bringing bowls for a sacrifice. Artemis is portrayed as a patron of Perge in a very long relief showing this sacrifice. So there you have that too. So very, very prominent in various ways. Now, I do want to say a few other things before we go too much further. And I do want to go a little further, but I'm looking at my time and I know it's pretty short. I would just say a few things. I'm going to generalize a few things. We do have, and I don't have time to go through all the details because I have to leave in a very quick sense. We do have evidence, actually inscriptional evidence, of a very active cult of Perge. But what I find is so interesting about this cult is that all of them, all the people who are worshipers, happen to be women. In fact, in many cases, men are excluded from these lists of worshipers, which I find, again, is a fascinating case. So, in fact, I'm going to go ahead. Maybe I'll go to that source if I can even find it here. Maybe I won't be able to find it. Yeah, okay, I won't be able to find it this year because it's buried. I have about 40-some pages of materials, so that's quite a bit. Actually, yeah, maybe I do have. Okay, yeah, okay. I'll go ahead. I found actually a few of these sources here. Okay, well, yeah. So here's okay. So what happens here? I got the source. Wow, I found it. All these pages, right? I want to make sure we get to this point because this is kind of important. And this is new materials. So we take a look And I'm going to go back, not too far back here. And I'm going to tell you where I think the temple is. And then we'll close up. Okay. So, as I mentioned before, okay, so you're going to have the priestess, a high priestess of Artemis was a priestess for life, right? And she was responsible for all private and public sacrifices. And on each new moon, it is said in the inscription, she must take a sacrifice for the health of the city. We know that as a priestess, she was not required to be celibate, but could marry and have children, and this was never deemed as distracting from her obligations. But she, according to the inscriptions, she received a choice piece from each victim offered in the public sacrifice, and that included a thigh and the shares given in addition to the thigh. As far as the collection procedure in connection to the priestesses of Artemis Perge at Halconarsis, so this is another place where they're worshiping Artemis of Perge, Halconarsis, it was similar to was also observed at the island of Kos. And accordingly, we find inscriptions that each year on the 12th of the month called Heracleion, priestess of Perge celebrates the general official sacrifice for which the Prytanis are responsible, but whose execution is entrusted, I'm going to go slow here, is entrusted to the, quote, the wives of the magistrates. Let's pause here. So according to this inscription, every year on the 12th of the month called Heracleion, the priestess of Perge celebrates a great sacrifice, right? For which the Prytanis are responsible. Prytanis is kind of like the local civic head, right? But whose execution is entrusted to the wives of the magistrates. So it's not the men who are doing the sacrifice, but it is their wives who are doing the sacrifice. Now the statute calls for an equal share for the priestess and the wives of the Prytanis responsible for the sacrifice. So that means the partaking, this is equal. So the women are to share together, instead of their husbands, a portion of the meat. So this is only for them, right? Now, this is interesting. So the affair is played out at another level. Surrounding the priestess of Artemis Perge, women, as we see from the inscriptions, occupy the entire sacrificial area. This is huge. Now remember, the sacrifice is not just to Artemis of Perge within any given city. This is a political sacrifice connected directly to the local city. And usually it is the men that are involved in a political sacrifice. Well, guess what? With Artemis of Perge, it is the women. So now that means that obviously the divine power granted powers to women in the form of the priesthood as well as the ritual, right? Female citizenship also comes out as a result of the festivals. So there's a focus on women being citizens within each given city during these rituals. It is a collective public festival embodying not only the political and religious aspect, but it is under women. I know you're kind of looking at me like, what's the big deal? This is a big deal, right? This is very unusually egalitarian. This right for women to be involved in the ritual slaughter and sharing of animal victims, and this also shows these women within this context of Artemis of Perge exercising real power within not only the religious sphere, but the political sphere as well. In fact, at Perge itself, women had the right to sacrifice together, and divide the victims up amongst themselves, and they did so in broad daylight before the eyes of the assembled city. Why are you saying, Dr. Riefel, before in broad daylight? Well, you guys know the Thesmophoria, right? No male eyes were tolerated, and but women were set aside. They did these rituals and sacrifices not within the city, but out in the country, out in the fields, right? This great ecstatic celebration. Well, when it comes to Artemis of Perge, this worship is done within the civic setting, within the political setting. Now, granted, when it comes to the cult of Artemis of the Ephesians, you kind of have a combination. What they did is they split the worship, and so of Artemis into two. You had the Britannicus side within the city, and most of those were men who are the officials, although the Britannicus, who's at the top, was oftentimes a woman, but the rest, those who were doing the sacrifices, were men. And then you had another group connected to the Temple of Artemis directly, and yes, a large part of them are women. However, those who are sacrificing are still men. In this case, it's women in all those cases. Isn't that fascinating? Well, now Artemis of Perge was also associated with giving messages in one's dreams. And so there was a certain Artemidorus of Naudus. He lived in the 2nd century CE, and he relates how Artemis Ephesia, as well as Artemis Perge, as well as the Lycian goddess Eleutheria, are all connected to one's dreams. And so you could see them appear and give you various messages, which I think is fascinating. So anyway, so there you go. He says, all right. So now by the time we get to Antonius Pius, now the coins depicting Artemis of Perge, they're really exotic. It's just basically a segmented box-like design with 7 sequences on it. And so, as you know, I find it's interesting. Now, you do have it kind of revert back of periods of time, but you're going to see that as Artemis of Perge goes along, the exotic indigenous features really do connect, or I should say, reestablish itself. Now, what we're going to do here is I'm finishing up, and I have a list of coins, and I would just say that these exotic coins continue for a very long time. In some cases, for example, this one is interesting here. It is a beetle, appearing to be a square-shaped stone with a rounded top, having a head of Artemis, not directly on the top, but inserted a little further down on the stone, with a tall headdress that widens out at the top. 3 distinct levels are visible on the surface of the stone, with what appears to be various figures inserted with possible square shelves. Maybe it looks like there's a moon that's connected to it. Sorry, this is on a coin, but we also see the exact same representation as in carving as well. Well, as time goes on, unfortunately, these ideas start to fade, and the city itself loses revenue and disappears. And of course, during the Christian era, we see many of these inscriptions being cut out, and there's obviously examples of mutilation. Now, let's conclude. So Artemis of Perge. One last thing. Where's this temple? Where's this great temple of Artemis of Perge? Now, yes, I became obsessed. I'm going to find the temple. You know, I helped find the Ortygia site in Ephesus. By gum and by golly, I'm going to go ahead and try to find the temple of Artemis of Perge. And so I got to Perge. I've been there a few times, as I said. I got to Perge, and I said, well, Strabo mentions it's a high place, and that it's connected to the city. And you kind of see them as one. And there's something that's natural because when you arrive at Perge, you go through the gates, you go down, there's this great colonnaded roadway. At the very end, there's this fountain. It's kind of cool. It's still there. This fountain with the fountain, the bed of the fountain, the pool going down the center of the road. It's actually a place for the water from that fountain to go down and fill up this pool that goes in the center of the colonnaded road, which must have been absolutely beautiful. And behind it is this hill, porous hill, where the springs run forth, and where there is it's an Acropolis, and where they thought the city first began. Yeah, I went up there, looked around. I found a Byzantine basilica. I found some earlier buildings. Some of them looked like they were, temples dedicated to various gods or goddesses, but I could not find anything that would support a monolithic temple of Artemis. So walked around, and I did some studies, and I also consulted some German sources as well, trying to figure out where this is. And I noticed something very strange. That is that you have roads. Earlier on, there is a road that connects the Acropolis directly with the river. It's kind of strange because you would think that, there's a little port by the river, the Castros River, and you would think that the road would go directly to the city of Perge itself, for commerce reasons. But why is there a road that goes directly to the Acropolis, as on the side, as opposed to the city? And that hit me a little strange. So it's kind of a prominent road too. So why would there be so much need for a prominent road to go to the side of the Acropolis? And it could be that it was leading towards a temple, the Temple of Perge. If it did so, I thought to myself, then there's a possibility. This is one possibility. It's not the only possibility. And that is there was a temple of Artemis on the Acropolis, but that part of the Acropolis where it stood fell away. It crashed in. I see some evidence that there was an erosion. There was something. Remember, there's the springs up there, and the water is pouring down. So it is possible. I'm just saying, it is possible that the reason why we can't find it on top is that section of the tabletop, that is this Acropolis, had caved in ancient times, perhaps under the weight of this ancient temple. Now, I am the only one that I know that has proposed this. But looking at this, I'm going, why else is there a big road there leading to nothing? It's a rock face. So that's a possibility. But there's also a hill beyond that there's one by the theater that I am eyeing as another possibility. But as of yet, it is still a mystery. Now, remember, this was a very famous temple, not as famous as the Temple of Artemis, but famous nevertheless. So, if you're interested in ancient mysteries and wishing for or hoping for something to be, magnificent to be found, maybe you want to focus in on discovering this ancient temple of Perge. And I'm hoping that it exists, and I'm hoping that I'm wrong, that the temple did just kind of crumble down the hill and was pulled away. But who knows? At the same time, another interesting factor I want to kind of bring into this conversation is the fact that you have an ancient legacy. I want to make sure we make this connection. Here you have this goddess, goes all the way back, all the way back to the great Anatolian goddess. And then through the Luvians, one group specifically, those known as the Luca, who are known as the Lycians, right? This goddess will then morph from the various wonderful gobbledygook names into this Leto and into this Artemis. And then, of course, this worship spreads to, or as part of, I should say, part of the worship of Perge. They are connected. But what is noteworthy is that there seems to be preserved in this worship the ancient Anatolian egalitarian ways within that worship, that women were esteemed within the cult of Perge. And I gave you so much evidence for that, and more too. But it gets trying at times to go through all these inscriptions. There's so much evidence to show that women were completely equal within this belief system, if not having a measure more, doing something that is unusual in ancient times. But also, as a result of the worship of Artemis of Perge, it's interesting to note a few other women of Perge that I did not talk about, but it's interesting to note that there is an unusually high amount of very important women to also come out of Perge, and who were great leaders and who helped build up the city and were patrons, and yet that patronage is still in the context of three of those individuals directly connected to Artemis of Perge. And so there we have it, some evidence of ancient beliefs. What I'm hoping is that there will be further studies on Artemis of Perge in this area where we can discover more writings, more inscriptions, so we can go further to put together this ancient belief system from scratch. And that's going to be quite a challenge. And so this is why this particular talk is really new and cutting edge and needs more further investigation. And that's where I'm at. So thank you so much. I will be here for a few questions, and then I'll be off. Thank you so much. A lot of materials. Any questions? No questions?
I guess you covered everything.
Any answers?
Yes, I think the temple was a floating temple.
It's a floating temple.
Right, because the road led to the river.
Brigadoon.
No, more like, the gambling ships on the Mississippi.
It just, maybe it's one of those great moments where, age is changing, people are no longer believing, and the temple rises up and then floats into the heavens. Back in the image that's fallen from heaven, it has returned back once again. So maybe that's what happened. Everybody's like, oh, it's a spaceship. Oh no. Aliens. Okay. Any other thoughts? I know you're not too excited about the crashing in this gigantic temple into the valley below, but there is a lot of stuff that's there, though, unfortunately. So I don't know.
Did you answer the question if she's actually Greek or not? Like,
so she's not Greek.
Not Greek, and
yeah, we answered that question.
Goddess that they had in Greece or anything like that.
So yeah, so what happens? Yeah, she's not. I mean, what happens is that she is definitely a indigenous Anatolian goddess that has a very faint guild of a Greek goddess on top of her. That's really just like Artemis of the Ephesians. And so when the Greeks see her, they will interpret her from their perspective and add those attributes on it. When it comes to the indigenous peoples who live there, who worship her, she retains that ancient heart, which is also true for the worshipers of Artemis of the Ephesians. Still retains that. You have some outer features that are Greek, but its heart still beats Anatolian. Yeah. So, and the interesting thing is the Artemis in general, the word, the concept comes not from Greece, but out of Asia Minor. And that's significant. And that means we're going to rewrite a lot of books, you know, because you're going to see a lot of books will talk about the bear. Well, there's bear. It's like in Thrace. It's like, really? People didn't think that at the time. You know, at the time, you know, even the time of the Iliad, right? They're connecting Artemis with Lycia, the Lycians. You know, anybody who's read the Iliad knows that. So the Greeks obviously look up the Iliad. You get my point. So they know better that Artemis is essentially Anatolian, and Apollo too. So many Greek legends talk about Apollo coming from the same region. So we need to do some rewriting. And what has happened is that as Artemis and the idea of Artemis enters into Greece, they will adapt Artemis to their local gods and goddesses. But if we're looking at the point of where does it start, it isn't Greece. It's Anatolia. Any other questions? Well, like I said, you know, this talk is, to me, even though it's destroy at times, even for me, it is still probably more revolutionary than any of the other talks, because this one changes the paradigm, makes a difference.
Yeah.
So yeah, we see here. Let's see. At Leros Island, Greece, there's our remnants of a temple which is called both Temple of Diana and a Temple of Artemis. Yeah. So you have this, of course, the concept is the Diana aspect, which is Latin, you know, and then of course the Artemis, which is we thought was Greek, but no longer Greek. But it's combining in this case the Anatolian, now understood as Greek, with the Roman goddess. So yeah, like I said, this is, you can see also the measure of women performing these sacrifices and the materials going out to the mothers. I mean, think about what that would look like visually. You know, how unusual that is. You know, because in Greek culture, women, you know, yeah, they go off into the woods, into the wilds, right? We're talking in the heart of the city. Or, you know, this is different. It's unusual, and it goes against so much of classical culture. That's why, again, I find this as a very important talk, because we have this remnant use on through this ancient worship. All right. So anyway, kind of makes you want to go to Perge. Yeah. So
Well,
go to Perge.
When you were talking about Metropolis, how there used to be a temple, there was probably a lot more to that whole place back when it was first built.
Yeah.
Because a lot of buildings have just fallen. A lot of it probably did just erode away, more likely.
Yeah, when I went to the Acropolis at Perge, when I was going through it, and then I had I had German, only in German. By the way, this stuff, majority of this is not in the English language. That's another problem. Is that the majority of my sources are in German. So the Germans are the ones who are excavating there, or the Turks are excavating there, but not the English language. So, so that's going to keep us out, which is unfortunate. So you have to know German. So I had this German guide, show me on top of the Acropolis. And you're right, you're right there. There was ancient sites in certain places, but you're very shrewd, because the thing is there are other places where it looked like it had been wiped clean. Material culture had been wiped. And I'm trying to figure out, I remember there's springs there. There's on top of the hill, and it got really wet and slippery. I got to tell you that I fell. I kind of went down the little 30 feet. Yeah, I'm describing it as like real not fun.
Yeah.
Hanged up and but because there's erosion through the water, that's also going to make the material culture a little bit mushy
Yeah.
and erode away a
Yeah.
little bit of the top as well. But there's one
Yeah.
area where I went where just like it seems like it should have keep going outward, and that's why I
Uh-huh.
keep thinking, well, maybe. And there's that big road. There's a big road leading nowhere. Where's this?
Yeah, it's probably something there. There was probably something there at one time.
Who would build a big road to nothing on top of Acropolis? And
Yeah.
it's coming directly from the port. So it's fascinating. But yeah, Darren, you should go to Perge. You would love it. It's
Okay.
it's fun to go up the hill. It's pretty cheap to stay there. So
Oh, really?
yeah, well, you could stay. See, the nice thing is there's lovely pensions there. Yeah, it's more affordable in Turkey than anywhere in Europe or the East Coast for that matter. So
Wow.
yeah, you can stay. Where I stay is between $15 to $20 a night.
Oh, dang. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So, and you'll be able to find that kind of price, maybe 30, in that area. So you just find the right pension and the right deal. But, and you go backpacking because there's a lot because the area around it's beautiful. I mean, you have these, like I said, beautiful mountains all the way around on all three sides, and then you have this turquoise water. You got places where the cliffs just kind of cut right in to the sea. There's undersea caves,
Uh-huh.
and then you got forests and ancient cities are in the forests. You're going through these forests, these hilly areas, and you'll discover an ancient city there. In some cases, they're so well preserved, still have the marble facing on top of them, which means that
Oh.
no looters have got to them.
Oh,
Oh,
that's good. Yeah.
So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Shada said Leros Island is near Turkey. Interestingly, they say Goddess Artemis was a protector of ancient Leros. Turkey can be seen from Leros. All very interesting. Yeah. So there is a very strong connection, as we see, between the Minoans and Anatolian civilization. I know today we associate the Greek Isles with, of course, Greece, politically. But the thing is that many of these isles like Lesbos and Samos are closer to the Turkish coastline than they are to the Greek coastline. And they're more in a cultural sense, or were up into the exchange of populations in the 1920s, were closer aligned to the culture of Anatolia or that area. So, any other questions? I think it'd be fun that they'll make these yet. Want to make some money? Make a souvenir Artemis of Perge image.
Okay.
okay,
I mean,
I'll
there's
put that on the top of my list.
yeah. I mean, hey,
Yeah.
right? All right. So, okay. So, my future talks are coming up, and I see here. What am I doing here? What am I?
Those aren't you.
I see one me.
Etruscan,
Okay,
Yeah, I'm
the
doing the
Etruscans are
Etruscans, right, on July 14th. Is that right?
yes.
Okay.
July
July 14th, I'm doing the Etruscans. All right. So I'm going to go and I'm going to pack and I'm going to go to sleep. So hope you guys enjoyed this talk, and I will see you when I talk about the Etruscans, which will be a fun talk.